You want to tell us a little bit about yourself? So you've 40 years of living with spinal injury and obviously the pain and issues around disability that come with that. And share us your story.
Okay,
What
yeah.
is that like?
So, well, it's been quite a journey. I'm 60 now, and I injured my spine when I was 16. So,
Mm,
that's by far the majority of my life that I've been living with this, what I used to see as an enemy, and now I would probably see as a companion. Definitely wouldn't call it a friend, but a companion along the way. That's taught me many, many things. Um, so prior to my injury, I was very sporty,
mm,
athletic, did a lot of mountaineering. I took my body for granted. I had a very comfortable relationship with my body. It was a body that worked very well, and I never really thought about the gift of that. I just lived my life.
mm.
And then I was lifting someone out of a swimming pool doing life-saving practice, ironically, and my back just started to hurt. And it turned out that I had a condition where my spine had fractured. It was a congenital weakness, and it had fractured doing that lifting. So I had a fusion the following year, and then that went wrong. So then I had a very major corrective surgery the same year. So I had two major operations when I was 17. Um, so I went from being this athletic, sporty girl who was on the conveyor belt towards thinking I could do what I liked with my life. And then here I was with pain. At that point, I was still fairly mobile. I mean, over the subsequent years, my mobility has really declined, and I now use a wheelchair and crutches for mobility. But at that point, I was still able to walk. I also missed a very crucial year of school. So I didn't actually end up going to university. So I'd always assumed I'd go to university. I was going to get a vet degree. That was my plan. And I was going to be a wildlife officer in New Zealand. That was my dream. I was going to live in the wilds, this sort of mythic wilderness life. Um, there's New Zealand is still fairly predator free nation, but nonetheless there are some rats and so on that have come in on ships. So they do the breeding programs for some of the native birds on wild remote islands, and you have to swim on and off the islands so that you don't bring any predators with you. So that was my myth. I was going to
Wow.
be one of these people that lived on these wild islands, and I so wanted to do that. So everything came crashing down. I didn't well, obviously I couldn't live that life as a disabled person. And I never ended up going to university and getting my vet degree. So that was, it's very interesting. We talk about disability and pain from the physical point of view, but of course it has a big social and emotional impact. So what I'd hoped to do with my life, or my dreams, came crashing down.
Mm,
And what was interesting is the way I dealt with it. And I think this is very common. This is the way human beings deal with catastrophe very often, as we go into denial. So basically what I decided was that I was not going to let this thing get me down. I was going to overcome this thing. I was going to be a hero. And you've got to remember, I was brought up in New Zealand, and New Zealanders generally are quite pioneering. New
mm,
Zealand women are very tough. So I sort of took on that mantle. Um, and I split off from my body. So obviously I've done all this work over the decades, learning how to work with my mind, learning how to work with my body. And I can now see how destructive that initial reaction was, to split off from my body, live in my head, believe I could do anything, continually push myself, continually have physical flare-ups. And I ended up working in film. I got a job in the film industry as a film editor. Sedentary, not good for my back either. Working very, very long hours. So 60 hours a week minimum on contract. And of course, if you're in denial, that's the perfect kind of job. You just split off into your head and you overwork, you become a workaholic. I was very alienated from my emotional life. I quite enjoyed my work, but looking back, it was never sustainable. And then when I was 23, I was in a car accident. And I was a passenger in the car, and the driver drove into a telegraph pole on the open highway, and I fractured another part of my spine. Awful whiplash, and you really don't want to get whiplash when you've got a fused spine, because there's nowhere for the shock to go. It all just gets jammed in your body. Concussion, various other injuries. So I had 4 months off work, and then remarkably and foolishly, I just went back. I just went back to working 60 hours a week. So interesting. So even having another catastrophe, I went straight back into denial, straight back into, this will not break me. I will overcome it. I will be a hero. And of course, that really was unsustainable. So a couple of years later, I effectively had a breakdown. It wasn't ever called that, but I went to see a doctor who said, you need to have complete bed rest right now. Go home, go to bed. Don't get up for 2 weeks. And I went to bed, and just that was it. It was like someone had pulled out the plug. I was completely and utterly exhausted, mentally exhausted, physically exhausted. And I didn't get up for months, basically. I had a collapse. I was 25. And so at this point, I'd also lost my career. So I'd lost my health, and now I'd also lost my career. I'd lost any financial security and stability. But then I had some injections that, again, it was a kind of medical disaster, really. They'd lost my x-rays. I had these injections into the part of my spine that they're injecting into joints that I didn't have anymore. So my bladder became paralyzed, and I ended up in an intensive care ward. Again, very, very interesting. As I'm saying the story, I think for someone like me who was so willful, so driven, this kind of deep denial, perhaps I needed to fall very, very low. I needed to absolutely hit rock bottom before I would even begin to entertain the idea that perhaps there was another way of dealing with my situation. So I was in intensive care. And I had this experience one night that completely changed my life. I often talk about this. And I had to sit up. I'd had this particular test, which meant I had to sit up for 24 hours afterwards. I hadn't sat up for months. I couldn't sit up. So I was in a kind of impossible predicament. Again, it's fascinating. I was having to do this thing that I could not do. And that's very interesting for the human mind. You're up against something that is rationally, logically impossible, and yet you have to do it. So here I was in the middle of the night, agonizing about how I was going to get through till the morning when I was going to be able to lie down again. So I had one part of my mind saying, I can't do this. I'm going to go mad. And I had another part of my mind saying, but you have to. I can't, but you have to. I'm going to go mad. No, you're not. And it was just getting more and more and more intense. It was like hell, really. And then at a certain point, another voice came in. And this other voice said, you don't have to get through till the morning. You just have to get through this moment and this moment and this one and this one. And you can do that. Yeah. And my experience changed. It went from being completely contracted and tight and tormented to being only relatively tight and contracted and tormented. But there was a bit more space in there, a bit more ease. And I got through till the morning, and I felt profoundly changed, because of course, within that voice, you just have to get through this moment. You just have to live this moment. It raises questions about what is time, what is space, what is consciousness, who am I? What is this idea of time and the morning that I'm agonizing about, when the insight was, we only live now. We only live now and now and now and now and now. And as I talk about it, they're just words coming out my mouth, aren't they? But it was completely sort of earth-shattering, because it came in to such a state of intensity. It's the most intense night of my life, without any doubt. So I woke up in the morning with these questions. Well, what was that? What was that about? What's time? What's space? Who am I? And I absolutely knew that was the truth. I absolutely knew that we only live life one moment at a time, and that the key to freedom is to somehow make that the compass of my life. the you know, the question of my life. How do I do that? How do how can I be fully awake in each present moment? And my life has, ever since that moment, which was in July 1985, that's been my quest. That's been my quest. You know, how can I be present to my life as it's happening, no matter what the content is? Yeah, so that was really remarkable. I had a few other experiences in hospital. I had the hospital chaplain come and do a meditation with me. And again, that completely changed my life, because he taught me that my subjective experience can change depending on what I do with my mind, with what I do with my awareness, because he got me to remember a time and a place where I'd been happy. I took my mind to the Southern Alps of New Zealand, where I'd been ecstatic. And maybe it was 10-minute practice, and I felt really different. And prior to that, I'd never thought I had a mind, really. You know, I was just alive. I'd never really thought, oh, I've got this capacity of awareness. That had never occurred to me. So again, the chaplain showed me, I have a capacity of awareness. Even though my body was broken, my mind was at least potentially healthy. So that it was like, how can I be present, and how can I train my mind? And those have been the things that have directed my life ever since.